So you may be building a web application in Python or specifically a web API in Python. If so, wonderful. But maybe you're just starting out, or maybe you've wrestled with some other frameworks like Flask or Django, and you probably thought that this could be done in a much easier way. Okay, so to get started, what we're going to need installed will be UV or you're going to want, if you're going to follow along here, you want to use UV. And to do that, you'll say, or to install FastAPI in the way that it should be, you'll want to say UV add FastAPI standard. So what that will then do is create a FastAPI value inside of your Pi project terminal file. And then now that we have all those formalities out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about what we're actually going to build. These guys right over it. What we're going to end up having at the end of everything. And by the way, just so you can see that this is actually going to do something in terms of working, let me show you the finished product. So back here, refresh this because example from a different video, from the earlier video. So if you're coming from that video, welcome. But this is going to be a bigger version of that particular video. So we'll say this is going to be the root. So anytime that the person or the user hits this this root here, the slash default root, this is what they're going to actually see. And if you want to see that in action, what that's going to look like will be 1000, and it'll be this guy right here. So welcome to our FastAPI school system. Tip, visit docs to see all of our endpoints that are available, and the endpoints that are available will be listed here, and then you can get all the students and all that kind of stuff. This is from my example. Obviously, we don't have that inside of the project that we're working on, but this is where this is all coming from. Then we can also get stats for all of the school information, so all the stats for the actual students inside the school. And then we can also do a health check. In this case, this is going to be a trivial health check. Technically, you would have a lot more integrations in terms of making sure that that actually works. So server health and all that kind of stuff. But for this example, we'll do that here for make sure that our API is actually working properly. And then we'll have students. So we'll be able to get all of our students, create the student or create a student, get a student based on a random student number or student ID. We'll be able to search through the students, get a student based on student ID. We'll be able to update a student and then delete the students, and then also grab subjects and subject matter IDs. All right, so all that said, let's now get back into our example here. So this is where all this stuff is going to actually be laid out. So we'll have our models, our database, our router, and then the main API that's going to bring all of this together. All right. So without further ado here, let's go ahead and create the bare bones of what we're going to need to import. So we'll say import of UVcorn. We'll also need FastAPI as an import. Whoops, way too many things. At least didn't want to do that part down there. We will need routers, but that's going to come later because we don't have that yet. But this is basically the gist of what we're going to actually need to have inside of our project to get started. We are going to do, so if you're again coming from the beginning, the bare bones beginner portion of this series from the other video, we are going to now use, instead of just put, post, get, delete, all that kind of stuff inside of the main.py, we're going to use something known as routers inside, or something known as routers, which I will then need to grab the documentation for that. So we're going to use this class right here. So the API router, what this is basically going to allow us to do is do something that looks like this, and specifically say, based on these parameters, so in this case users, and in terms of the documentations users, anytime that we have this prefix right here, so in this case, is example users, we want to then allow the database or allow the user to be directed to this function. So this function here is just going to, in their example on the documentation for FastAPI, just going to read the information from here. Cool. So that's what we're going to do inside of our example as well. But we're going to do that in a separation of concerns. So if you could take a look here, we will have a routers folder that we're going to put all of these routes inside of. So let's go ahead and do that now, because in order to really do anything else, we're going to need that first. So let me do this before we do that though. Let's go ahead and say that we want if name equals main, cool, and we want to then say uvcorn dot run. The app will be at main, so the name of our file colon app, and then host will be 127.0.0.1, port will be 8000, and reload will be true. Cool. That's the bare bones of everything that we need to get started here. I'm going to also say that this is going to have a version number. I guess we could just call it version 1.01. That's cool. And down here, though we don't have them yet, we will place routers here. So this is going to be the routers that we saw earlier, example project. So default, students, and then subject, right? So now that we have that understood, let's go ahead and create the general router for default. So because default doesn't necessarily have anything that we actually need yet. So let's go ahead and create that. So to do that, we'll go ahead and create a new folder. We'll call it routers. And inside of routers, we will have a few different files inside of it. The first will be a init.py file. So we'll say init.py. To get started here, we'll go ahead and import the doc string for this. So routers package. We'll go ahead and say I want this, or what this is going to do is say this folder is going to contain all of our API routes and endpoints, or endpoints for lack of better words. What this is basically going to do for us is, if you don't know what this is, routes are like different pages on a website. So again, slash whatever, slash users, slash students, whatever. Each route that we have is going to handle a specific type of request, so get, post, etc. And we're going to be separating our routes, as we mentioned earlier, based on the go back to the documentation, based on the URL or the endpoint that we have here. And inside of documentation, we're going to give it a specific tag, so that when we actually go and look at it, we can say, okay, this is for default, this is for students, this is for subjects, and all that kind of stuff. So what we're going to need will be some routers or a file for general. So and since we have that now, we're going to go ahead. Well, let's go ahead and create all of our folders, all files for the route, so we can just get that out of the way. We'll say students next, and then students.py, and then also we'll say subjects. Well, so again, we're going to start with general, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to grab all of this and place it inside of here. And this is basically going to say we want to grab the students, or the router for the students, as student router. We wanted to grab the router for subjects as student or subjects router, and then the router for general as general router. And then we're going to import that inside of students router or students router, subjects router, and general router here. Okay, so with that created, now let's go ahead and create the actual general router. And again, to save some time here, I'm going to grab this code and place it over here. Let's grab this, the imports. This is going to be created later on because we don't necessarily have the database mock yet, but we're going to create that in a second. I'm going to grab the API router, place that over here as well, and then place the read route. So the thing that we are going to always see when we get to the main portion of our application. Okay, so this is our read route. So whenever, for starters, whenever someone goes to localhost 8000, they'll see this message. This is, excuse me, the welcome message to our API. So welcome to FastAPI school system. Visit /docs. This is what we saw earlier. Students, subjects, random student documentation, all that kind of stuff. This is what they should be able to expect to see when they go to these particular endpoints. Okay. So now with that, what we also now want to be able to do is contact the database, then see what's going on inside of it, and then give a status about the actual the statistics of the school system. So again, I'm going to grab that code that I have over here. Here, we will discuss what's going on here. So, router get, or again, because we are now attached to a router, which in this case is router, we could call that anything that we wanted to. We could call it default router or whatever. But for this example, it makes sense. So this will say at stats, so at /stats, get the school stats ID. Again, I'll just say for starters, we'll do this endpoint shows some fun statistics about our student ID or student body or student database. It also demonstrates how to calculate the data from our database. Then we're going to contact that database, although it's going to be in a memory type of situation, so not an actual database. But we'll grab that DB that's going to be imported here. And if we don't necessarily have a database for students, we'll return no students to analyze, nothing to see here at all. Then from there, we'll say calculate some interesting statistics, total students, the length of the database of students, ages will be a list comprehension of sorts in this case. And we'll say that we want student dot age for student in student database, and then get the average of those students. We'll also count each of the grades. So which grade level do we have inside of our student body? So we'll loop over all of our students and get that information from here. Then we will count our favorite or count the popularity of favorite subjects based on the students that we surveyed. So we'll say subject of popularity, then loop through all the students, see what their favorite subject is, then do a calculation for that popular subject, and then place that inside of subject popularity here, and then return that most popular subject as the max value, so whatever that happens to be. If there is none, then we'll just say none. Cool. And then we'll just return all that information. So school overview of total students, total subjects, average student age, and then give that information, the grade distribution, subject popularity, most popular subject, and then the time that this report technically, so say if we were a principal at a student or at a student at a school, we would want to see when this was actually generated. Cool. So the next and last thing inside of the general purpose area will be the health check. So I'll grab that and bring it over here. And that again is going to be a router. So the same router that we've been using in this file at /health. Async in this case will be, or will use the availability if we were actually like going out to get information from the database. We would use async here. Technically, we can keep this off, but it's a good practice. If you want to go ahead and use that later on, you can, because this could change. We'll then do the health check. So for starters, we will then say this is like checking the school's system, basically. So seeing if everything is running smoothly, making sure that our API is actually healthy. If not, why not? How do we rectify that? All that kind of stuff. This is basically like going to a Discord server health check or something like that. You would want to do something like this to give the user, the end user, information on either why it's down or when it could be back up, or if it's all green and everything is all good. So now that we have that, we'll go ahead and save this. And to get this to work, because of that DB requirement, we are going to now need to create the database mock. Let's go ahead and create a folder for that. And we'll call this, of all things, database. Inside of this database, very similar to the other things, we were going to have a init.py. And it's going to be pretty similar, pretty standard in that regard as well. So I'm just going to grab all the information that we have here. We'll grab all that over here and paste it right over here. All right. So the mock DB, obviously we don't have that yet. We're going to create that in just a second. But this is the folder that is going to contain all of our database related information. For starters here, we're going to basically be able to use a mock database, fake data inside of memory. In a real app, like we said earlier, you would use Postgres, MongoDB, or such. And then separating the database code makes it easier to switch to a real database for later, which is exactly what you would want to do if you were prototyping this for a project or something like that. Even if in the world of vibe coding, you still might want to practice doing stuff like this, because it gives you more context later on to actually go and do the things that you need to do for the back end of your application. So again, what this is basically doing is grabbing all of our information from MockDB, the mock database information, which we're going to create, which is going to be a class, and then get database information as well. And then this, if you've never seen this before, this allows us to do, so let's say we were doing something like from database import all or star. This is especially if we had a whole lot of things that we wanted to grab hold of specifically for the end user, for the end developer that is using this. That then means that we only will import with the star, that is specifically, we only will import mock database and get database. If there's anything else that needs to be imported, it's not going to be imported specifically at this point, because we only said we only really need to import these two things. Now, if we want to, we still could import other things that would possibly be inside this package, but in general, this is basically the reason why we get away with this, or why it actually will work if we do an import, and it's only going to import these two things. All right. So with that said, let's go ahead and create our mock DB. And that is also going to be something I'm going to grab over here. So we'll say new file. We'll do mock underscore db.py. And I'm going to import some of the main imports that we're going to need here. Obviously, we do need to create models. So model, student, subject. But we are going to do that in just a second. Well, since we're on that subject, let's go ahead and create those now, I guess. So we'll do that. We'll say models. And then again, inside of here, we'll do init.py. And we are going to also need to do very similar thing that we did from before. So we'll say this guy right up here. So we don't have student and subject as of yet, obviously, but we will in just a second. So we can go ahead and say student.py, and we can grab, I think that was subject.py. So now that should be pretty well in hand, although we don't have student and student create subject yet. We will create those in just a second inside of these particular files, but just so this doesn't scream anymore, we can go back to mockdb, and we also need to import or install Faker, because we're going to use Faker to create this information for our database. So let's go back down inside of our terminal, go to UV and say add Faker. That then should solve that, and we should be all good there. You see that this now added Faker to our Pi terminal, so this is good, or Pi project terminal, whatever this is called. From here, now we can actually go ahead and create our database. So the mock database class that we're going to have will look like this. First off, we're going to create or grab hold of Faker. And then we're going to create a mock database class, which is going to look like this. I'm going to bring it over here. Going to bring it here. All this. Paste it here. And let's talk about what this is actually going to do for us. So this is a simple mock database that is going to be stored inside of our memory, inside of our own machine. For starters, this will be a class, or this class will act as a database for simpler purposes. In this case, it will store students and subjects inside of Python lists, and then it will automatically create some fake data whenever it gets started. So we'll grab an init to initialize this. So set up the database with empty lists and starting ID numbers. So again, empty list for students, empty list for subjects, starting ID number of 1 for both subject and student here. And then this will create a simple database inside of or using this class as well, which we will need later on. So, which we created later on down here. So we'll say create simple database, which is getting called up here every time this is initialized. So again, creating simple sample database or sample data with Faker, which is a library that gives us realistic but fake data. Then from here, we're going to loop over this in a range of 5. So create basically 5 different students, or 4. Well, five different students, but 0 to 4 technically inside of the range. We'll say student, and based on the student mock data or mock class that we are going to have here, which is just going to have ID, name, age, and grade, we're going to allow this to come from any of these. So if you were coming from the other video into here, this is a larger type of example here. We then will have an email for the student, fake subject, so math, science, English, history, etc., etc., etc. Self of student, so it's going to append to this list up here, the student list up here, and then we're going to also give an incrementation of the ID every time that a student is created, and the subjects that are available will be mathematics, teacher, whoever the teacher's name actually happens to be from Faker, inside of room number 101, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Then from there, we'll go ahead and create subjects from the subject data that will be created later on. So subject in the model of ID, and then subject data that we will create up here. So subjects data. And then, so subject data from subjects data, I'm sorry. And then subjects will be appended to the list that we created up above inside of our init, and then incremented by ID inside that same place as well. So now that we have that guy, we will then create or allow the database to be retrieved from here. So we'll outside of this class, we'll go outside of this class here and paste that right over here. So we'll say, give us the database, which is the creation or the calling of this class. The database, basically, and this is denoting that this is being called or a local-ish variable inside of Python. Then we'll say, get the database from the mock database information that we have here, or it's going to return that information. So get all the documentation, or get the database information that we have, and then return that down here. No harm, no foul. That's pretty much it. So now that we have all of this, let's now go ahead and create our models. And once we have the models, we'll be able to create our endpoints and see this actually working. Okay, so now that we have everything in terms of our database, our generic route is working. So we know that our API actually will work. We can now create what will be used for the data that is actually going to be inside of our information or inside of our fake database. So I'm again going to grab all of that and bring it over from my example here. That is going to have our student model, which is going to inherit from our base model, which is also going to do the same thing for student create, so that when we create a student, it adheres to the exact same information that is inside of a student that is inside the database. So this model is going to represent the student body or the student object inside of our school system. That then is going to have an ID, a name, an age, grade, email, and favorite subject. Again, same type of situation for student create, but just so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, we're going to say the same exact stuff. So name, age, grade, email, and favorite subject. But notice that this doesn't have an ID because that only needs to be available inside the student class that we're creating up here. This is going to be auto generated for the creation of a student here. So we don't necessarily have to say that verbatim inside of student create, which is why we're leaving this off. So with student created, now we need to create the model for subject. And that again is going to be very similar to from before. So we'll say we need to grab Pydantic, all the stuff, all the fixings from there. So again, we'll say from Pydantic, import base model and field. The base model will go here as the starting point for subject, or what a base model or what a base subject would actually look like. And then from here, we'll say this is going to define what information we store inside of our class subject or subject information. That's going to have ID, name, teacher, and roll number. Since we're not creating a subject every time or giving the ability to create a subject on the fly here, we won't necessarily need a subject. Where did I? There it is. We won't necessarily need a subject create like we have here. We only need subject because we're just going to attach these values inside of the API for a given student. So go ahead and save these guys here if you haven't already, just to make sure that I got everything. And now that we have all of that, we can now create our student routes and subject routes and then test to make sure that our actual information is being created as we expect. So for the sake of time, I'm going to, again, as we have inside of the other portions of this video, I'm going to grab the needed information, bring it over inside of our project over here from my example. Now that we have all of our information inside of the routes, now that we have all of our information inside of our mock database and inside of our models, we can actually go ahead and create the API routes that we are expecting to have inside of this project. So we are going to need some typing, so list and optional, fast API information, so API router, HTTP exception, path and query, Faker obviously, then student and student create, and then the get database call for getting the mock database from the database. So here again, as we talked about earlier, we are going to use API router. The prefix will be students, which is what we did inside of here. Where are you? The prefix will be students, which is again something we did inside of general up here. Well, technically we didn't do general here, but this is going to be known as the base of everything. So we necessarily don't have to. But for all of our students, we are going to make sure that that prefix is always going to be there. All routes inside of this file will have students as a prefix, and then something else goes after it. Then tags will be for the database or for the documentation. I'm going to use Faker to create some fake data here, and then router flash. Again, this is going to be the starting point for getting all students technically. So students flash will be that basically. So if we were looking at that, will be flash students, and then that would be basically the ending point of that. So that's what this is going to. This is what this is saying. Then we're going to get all the students, very similar to other examples. So we'll say get all students. For this is going to ask the principal, in this case, for a list of everyone at the school, get the database from, or get the information from the database so that we can use it here, the object, and then list all the information that is inside of the database from there. Then we're going to grab a randomly selected student here. So we'll say if, let's say this was a pizza drawing or some type of prize or something like that for the student body, we can say get a random student, which was going to return randomly selected student. This then will say, again, we're picking this out of a hat, like I said earlier. We're going to grab the database. Then if not, if we don't have a student, then we'll say 404, no students found in our school, time to recruit some. Then we'll say if we do find a student based on fake information from the random element of db.students, which is basically from Faker, we're going to use a random element that is available here that is hopefully, if it's available inside of the students database, then we'll see it. If not, then we'll see this. And then we'll just return the random student there. Then from here, we're going to do exactly what this endpoint looks like it actually does. We're going to use search or allow the user to search inside of the database of students. And again, we're going to set some information. So name, grade, minimum age, and maximum age, and query based on the information that is available inside of our database, assuming that we would have some. So search by student, filter by the grade level, the minimum age, and the maximum age, which in this case would be 18. We'll then say we want to query based on the information that's inside of our database, filter the students that are there, and then if we find a particular student, so if the student that we're looking for is there, then we can search based on their name, based on their grade, or search the parameters of their grade, and we might find a whole bunch of different values inside of this one, technically, because there could be more than one. Same thing for this one, and could be also be for this one as well. But if here, technically for the name, unless we have multiple students with a bunch of the same names, which could happen, we would want to see that in a specific light and be able to return that back to the principal. So then we'll say we want to look for name, grade, minimum age, and the total found that we actually found here based on the filtered students. That again is going to come from up here. And then return the actual students that we have. Then later on, we can get a router. So get router student ID. Or sorry. Then later on, we can go ahead and get the student based on their ID. So straightforward as you would expect. Get the student based on ID 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and then get some type of student relational data that should be there. If not, if we don't have one, then we say, well, don't look like we got one. Couldn't find a student based on that ID. But if we loop through all of our database of students, if we find the student ID, we'll then return that student ID and return that back to the principal. If now we want to create a new student, so a new student comes in from a different country, different state, or something like that, we then want to create a student. Again, this has the slash, so that's going to only be post students. So that's the reason why we can do this. So the result here would, because we are saying post, we can say slash students and not get in trouble. So from here, we'll say, again, this could come from a database, which is the way that this is kind of set up at the moment. So in this case, we'll allow this to be async because we want this to be future proof. We'll say student data, student create, and then create a new student based on the information that is currently inside of the database, or we'll get the database and then allow our program or our API route to add to that database. Then we're going to grab the new student data, place it, or give it a ID, or give that student ID, and then use student data and create a dictionary of information from there. Then from that particular situation, we will then append to the student list that is inside of the DB, so inside of mock database. And then from there, we will say db.next student ID, and again, increment that. So if it's at 5, it'll go to 6. So again, 5 is where we currently should stop. Then that will go to 6, and 7, and then 8, and then 9, and etc., etc. Then we just go ahead and return that student, and we should see information as we should expect from the student body for that particular student. If we want to then update a student, so let's say they want a name change or something like that, or their parents get married and they now have to change their name, we now want to look inside of the information. So for our student, so get the student ID and the student data, and then create that information. Technically, it should start out as none because we don't necessarily have to create anything, but we would be able to if we needed to. So then from here, we'll say get the data or get the database, loop through all of the information inside of the data or inside the database of students, enumerate that information, and then give us the available student that we want to update that student, and then place that student back inside of the data or place that student data back inside the database and return that information to the principal. If we don't find a student at all, then we want to raise an HTTP exception and say 404, we didn't find anybody for that ID. And then lastly, but not least, hopefully, we would have a delete value or delete function for a student. So say a student graduates or goes to a different school or something like that. We grab the information from the data or from the database, loop through all of the information inside the database, find their student ID. If we find it, then pop it off of the list that is inside of the database class and return the information that has been deleted. If we don't find a value for a particular student ID, then that should be taken into consideration and shown in 404. Say, hey, we didn't find this student at all. So again, now that we have all of this information, what we should be able to do now is go into here. And let me make sure I stop my example. And then we should be able to then say, I think that was UV corn. Main, I think main app. They call it. Oh, hey, I didn't save it. Whoops. All right, there we go. Now this should work. Yay. Okay. So we have UV corn. If we go back to our example here, or go back to this guy. Whoops. Well, what happened here? I know what happened. I forgot to put things inside of my main.py that are actually supposed to be in here. So remember that we will place our routes here. Now we actually have to go and do that. So let's do that here. So we'll say app.include router, general router, app.include include router, students router, and subject router. And I need to now import these guys as well. So I'll go back up here, import them, and we should be good to go. We don't have subject router just yet, but we will. That might throw an error, but we'll see. If I go ahead and refresh this now, we should see the information that. And as I was expecting, that is going to create an error. And by the way, in order to see that, you would have to stop your server and reload. Although I said that this is going to do this, but anyway, I'm gonna comment this out for a second until we get here, but we will have this later on. So if we go ahead and say I got that, we should. Oh right, yeah. Can't sit here with that either. Okay. General route, students router. Now we should be good. No, still don't like me. Oh yeah, you're two. Don't have you yet. Fix router. And well, let's do this. Comment this out. Students router and general router. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Forgot about a few things that I had taken out of here. We will put those back in just a second once we verify that the students routes are actually working. Should be there. Cool. Okay. So we got our default back. We got students good and ready to go. So we got the ability to get all the students. So we can say try it out, execute. We got all of our students that are in here. Awesome. We can grab a random student as well. So random student, Kenneth Allen. We can see that that is actually also the difference. So Andrew Flores, cool. And then let's say, can we search for a student? So let's see, do we want, let's do Andrew. Saw him earlier. That, and yeah, Andrew, no, because we didn't look for anything else in terms of the search criteria. So everything else was null, but we did get Andrew Flores as we were expecting. So that is working in the way that we expected to. Okay. So now that we have all of that, let's go ahead and put everything back in working order that we had it in before. I'll save this guy, then go to main.py, bring in the subjects router. And to do that, we will now need to save that and go into subjects and create that router. So that is going to look very similar to the other route. So I'm not going to bore you with that. So we'll say grab all of this. There we go. And we're going to create a get route based on a subject ID. So get a subject by its ID. When we do that, we're going to look inside of our database based on the subject ID. Get the subject ID. So it's going to grab the database here, grab the subject ID, and then look inside of a for loop of all the student or all the subjects. I'm sorry. Look for that ID that we're looking for, return that subject, and then if we don't have it, we will then throw a HTTP error. Also, we will be able to get all the subjects as well. So get all the subjects and get all of the database information about subjects, then pass that into our return and return all the values that we have there inside of our subjects. So again, we need to save this. I'm going to stop the server and then run it again just so it picks up the subjects. We should now be able to go inside of our documentation, give that a refresh, and then we now have subjects. So we can get all the subjects that we have here, execute subjects. We get all those subjects that are there. And then last but not least, we should now be able to get a subject based on the ID. So let's say 2, for example, and subject 2 is science. So, and Anthony Miller is the teacher. All right. So hopefully now this gives a deeper understanding on how to use FastAPI to create a API really fast. Obviously it's in the name, but it just by some of the basic things that we did inside of student subjects with models and all that kind of stuff, and a mock database. And in general, we have all of this information given to us for free based on the way that we set up our project inside of our main.py with the routers and all that kind of stuff. All of it is sectioned out so we can look at different parts of the API and test different things without messing up anything else. We know exactly where things should come from, where they are going based on the router and specifically the prefix. So all of our prefix routes are going to have this for students. All of our prefix routes are going to have subjects for subjects. We know exactly what's going on. And if we need to put anything specific about the API, we can put that inside of general and go from there. So hopefully this was helpful getting you started on your journey on understanding how to use FastAPI, especially if you're doing anything with agentic APIs or anything like that. You can do this inside of a larger array of different projects or what have you, or if you're just trying to get your feet wet with a new framework. Hopefully this serves as a good starting point. But until next time, until next video, y'all be smooth. Blurred out.